The Han tribe's expansion continues as Rat negotiates with the salt-deprived Yu tribe near the chestnut forest, designated for a new silk-focused city, Ruyang. Impressed by Han advancements like horses, carts, abundant salt, and porcelain, the Yu chief, Yu accepts an invitation to Hanyang City. Witnessing its staggering scale, sophisticated agriculture, rice cultivation, animal husbandry, organized labor, and imposing infrastructure, Yu is overwhelmed. The protagonist strategically reveals the plan to build Ruyang adjacent to the Yu settlement, framing assimilation as mutually beneficial, offering prosperity and security in exchange for labor. While grappling with the implications, Yu agrees his tribe will work on the new city, whose construction begins swiftly, facilitated by efficient river transport and Yu manpower. Meanwhile, Sang-Chu successfully collects valuable chestnut silkworm cocoons. Just as Ruyang's foundations are laid, Scout Yu Yi returns, bringing the Highland tribe, Gao clan, with domesticated alpacas and proto-tea, adding new resources and integration challenges. On the third floor of the teaching building, you were using a small red clay stove to brew a pot of primitive-style leaf soup. This tea, procured from the mountain tribe, was either a culinary disaster or the nectar of the gods. There was no telling which. However, you had always been a person of action. What did it matter? Brew it first, ask questions later. After all, back on your blue planet, tea was hard currency, ranked alongside ironware, cloth, and salt as the big four. Various thoughts flashed through your mind. The nomad buddies on the steppes lacked vitamins and relied on brewing these leaves with milk to get by. Later, when those European bigwigs were thoroughly routed by their Arab brethren, they heard tell of leaves steeped in water from the east, and their eyes practically turned green with desire as they desperately sailed over. Afternoon tea? A staple for the nobility? That all came much later. The key was, this stuff could make money, you muttered inwardly. Whether it tastes good or not isn't important. What's important is that I think it tastes good, so it must taste good. Even if it tastes worse than dirt, you'll still have to obediently cough up the cash. Yes, that was how you persuaded people with virtue. The stove fire crackled, steam curling upwards. You poured boiling water into the earthenware pot, rinsing the dust off the tea leaves, then refilled it with fresh boiling water. A peculiar grassy fragrance, or perhaps an odd smell, began to spread. Yu looked up at Yu Ye and the mountain tribe chief with the simple, honest face standing before you. Yu Ye, you said, taking a sip of the tea and barely managing not to spit it out on the spot. I'm quite curious. How did you manage to bamboozle? No, persuade them to join our Han tribe? Tea was certainly important, but this ready source of labor delivered right to your doorstep interested you even more. Yu Yi scratched his head and replied, Chief, it was quite a coincidence. Didn't you previously order us to capture some tongues from the cannibal territory? We tried a few times, but those fellows are extremely vigilant. You can't sneak in without horses, but if you ride in and grab someone, you can't get away. It was like a game of cat and mouse. We got sent scrambling every single time. So the mission to capture informants went bust. We proceeded with the second plan, heading back along the river and scouting the route as we went. We didn't discover the mountain tribe at first. Later, following the river downstream, we ran into a small band of cannibals, about 40 or 50 of them. These bastards were escorting a dozen or so mountain tribespeople. Looked like they were taking them back to their lair. When results, like that, are served on a platter, how could we pass it up? We had to throw a wrench in their works. Gao Ran, the chief of the Gaoshan tribe, was a practical man. His reason for joining the Han tribe was simple. Hanyang City's walls were tough, high enough and could take a beating. They could protect his people from being devoured like snacks by enemies. Of course, you knew very well that walls alone weren't enough. Yu Ye's silver tongue had probably done its fair share of hyping up the happy life in the Han tribe. Over. 500 people. That was no small number. Your mind raced. Hanyang City definitely couldn't cram them all in. Better to pack them off to Ruyang Commandery for infrastructure work. Conveniently, the Yu tribe there also numbered around 500. Tossing the Gaoshan tribe over there could even spark some friendly competition, preventing any single group from becoming too dominant. You calculated silently. Over 500 from the Gaoshan tribe, more than 170 from the Sang tribe, plus the nearly 500 from the potentially loyal Yu tribe. Altogether, 1,200 people. Even having that for labor gives 600 strong workers. Spare a few more hands from the Han tribe side, and building a new city would be more than feasible. The core team for Ruyang Commandery was basically assembled. From now on, it just needed continuous infusions of people and resources. Come spring, when the 4,000 people from the 2 northern tribal alliances headed south, they could be perfectly slotted into Fuma Pass. Then the 3 strongholds could support and balance each other out, offering great flexibility. With the plan decided, you immediately arranged for Shu Da to take Caravan to the Ruyang Commandery construction site for an on-site inspection. If they found it acceptable, the entire tribe would relocate immediately. Surviving the winter, they could just use the excavated earth to build rammed earth houses for now. Adobe huts were quick to build, quick to dismantle, and could accommodate heated beds. Kang. Surviving one winter would be absolutely no problem. They could move again next year when the new houses were ready. Convenient. Having dealt with the newly arrived Gaoshan tribe, the projects in Hanyang City were also mostly wrapping up. Only that skyscraper, the office building, remained. The wooden frame was already up, just needing doors, windows, and walls. Papermaking. Technology in Liuyang Commandery had improved, so there was plenty of paper for pasting over the windows. After handling these matters, you hauled over Yu Yi, who had only rested for a few days. You narrowed your eyes, smiling like a fox. Yu Ye, I've got a major city building project for you. Interested? Yu Ye looked bewildered. Huh? Building. A city? Chief, are you talking about the one in Ruyang Commandery? Isn't Shu Da overseeing that? What would I do there, just stand around twiddling my thumbs? Not at all, not at all. You wagged your finger. It's Fuma Pass. I plan to establish a county there to prepare a place for those 4,000 people coming south next year. We can't just let them sleep on the streets when they arrive, can we? And if we wait for them to build it themselves, another year will go to waste. Yuya spread his hands, his face crestfallen. Oh, but how would I know anything about building a city? I just know how to run around aimlessly with my brother. This technical work, I'm really no good at it. You took a deep breath, resisting the urge to smack him. This kid was clearly trying to slack off. Fine, forcing it wouldn't work. You started sifting through the available candidates in your mind. Dashu? No. He had to hold down the fort in Luyang Commandery with its nearly 20,000 people. Shuda. He was busy in Ruyang Commandery. Shoya. Military Sima in charge of troops couldn't be moved. Shuetu. A good hand at fighting and killing, but construction. He'd probably chop the blueprints to pieces. Those newly joined clan chiefs. Not enough experience, and you didn't trust them completely. The leader of a new city needed prestige and had to be one of our own people. Sigh, talent is sorely missed when needed. Your fingers tapped the table, images of people flashing through your mind. Got it. Ying Rui. The Ying clan joined early, had enough prestige, and their loyalty was reliable. Just look at the carrier pigeons, giant eagle version, flying back and forth. Without them, your information superhighway would have long since collapsed. It's just that this guy probably wasn't skilled in civil engineering either. He needed a deputy. You thought for a moment. Shito Du-er. One was steady, the other experienced, right settled. Yingray would oversee the big picture, while Shito and Du-er would handle the actual construction. Perfect. With the personnel decided, next came the planning for Fuma Pass. This location held significant military importance. It couldn't be built as just a simple little earthen town. Your concept was rather insidious. At the narrowest point of the valley, slam. First build a wall to seal it off. But that wasn't enough. Such excellent terrain. Using it purely for defense would be too wasteful. Outside, another wall. The section sandwiched between the two walls would be an urn city, just as the name suggests, designed to lure attackers into the urn, into a trap. You pictured the scene. The enemy arrives, the gate in the first wall is wide open, welcome. Once they've foolishly poured in, the gate slams shut behind them. Ha ha, trapping them like dogs. No, trapping and starving. The turtles! You had no interest in clashing head-on with them. Hold the inner wall and let them starve in the urn city. Once they were starving, chests practically sticking to their backs, you'd open the gates and go in to collect the spoils. The cannibals were dirt poor with no valuables, but they themselves were resources. Capture them as slaves for mining, brick moving, kiln firing. All cheap labor. Capturing them was pure profit. Just building one extra wall, this deal was absolutely worthwhile. The Urn City was a military fortress, not for habitation. The actual county seat had to be built south of the Urn City. There was flat land within the Fuma Pass Valley, and mountain springs on the cliffs on either side. You mused, divert the mountain springs down, dig a large pit to store water. Call it a reservoir. Sounds impressive. With a reservoir, you could open up paddy fields for rice cultivation. On the slopes, plant some drought-resistant corn. These two crops were a blessing for the lazy. Plant them, and they don't need much tending, yet yields are high. Self-sufficiency would be no problem. You also needed to plant some mulberry trees, hemp, chili peppers, and vegetables on the mountains, along with some fruit trees. Raising silkworms for silk, twisting hemp into rope, weaving cloth for clothes, raising chickens for eggs. These were all income-generating livelihoods. If you wanted to raise cattle and sheep, the hilly grasslands outside the valley were vast enough for them to roam freely. Wool could be sold, and beef and mutton were another source of income. In short, with a water source, land could be cultivated. With land, population would naturally be attracted, forming a settlement. Fuma Pass County would be planned behind the Urn City. It would also need walls, though not necessarily as impregnable as the Urn cities. A height similar to Hanyang cities would suffice. This project was indeed substantial. Although the overall scale couldn't compare to Ruyang Commandery, the involved tasks were complex and varied. 2 Urn City walls, 1 county wall, plus digging channels to divert water, and excavating a large pit for the reservoir. Just thinking about it was headache-inducing, but there was no need to rush. The main workforce wouldn't arrive until next year. This year's small goal was to get the 2 Urn City walls built first. Safety was the top priority. Then head up the mountain to locate water sources, dig channels, and direct the water to the planned reservoir site. As long as these 2 tasks were completed, farming could begin next spring. Once the busy farming season passed, the county construction could proceed step by step. You nodded with satisfaction, thinking inwardly that the plan was practically perfect. If the soil problem is solved, then I have no problem. Shito thumped his chest confidently, accepting the task. You turned your gaze to Du-Er, who hadn't spoken yet. Du-Er frowned slightly, thought for a moment, and said, "Chief, there's not much water in that place, only small streams up on the mountain. Getting water for drinking and irrigation won't be convenient. Then cut down trees to clear paths, dig channels, and divert the mountain streams down. Then dig a big pit at the base of the mountain to store water. Call it a reservoir," you declared confidently, presenting the solution you'd already thought. Out. Chief's method is good. I have no problem either. What's next? Du-Er nodded in agreement. All right, then it's settled. Ying Rui, you're in overall charge. Pick the location. Organize people to transport soil from outside the valley to build the walls. Du-Er, you focus specifically on finding water sources. Digging channels, gathering the water together, and then digging the reservoir. As for you, Shito, you pointed at him. Focus solely on clearing the land. Clear all the grass and trees, then go up the mountain and cut down trees. Cut down as many as you can, pile them up, and leave them for building the city next year. Quickly and efficiently, you assigned the tasks clearly. The three men acknowledged their orders in unison. 2 days later, the freshly formed Fuma Pass Advanced Construction Brigade officially set out. 300 elite Hanyang men, plus 200 slave laborers, totaling 500 people. Led by Ying Rui, Du Er, and Chateau, the convoy, laden with mountains of grain and tools, headed grandly towards the northern valley. Another expansion point for the Han tribe had begun construction. Fuma Pass was, frankly speaking, just the opening in the mountains behind Hanyang City, not far away. At the current pace of these iron feet walking 20 kilometers a day, it would take 3 days at most to reach, covering perhaps 60 or 70 kilometers. You estimated it was probably around 60 kilometers. That distance was nothing. With Hanyang City as the center, construction on the northern and southern fronts proceeded simultaneously. Everything was on track. You sat firmly in your third-floor command center in the teaching building, receiving daily reports from both locations, masterminding operations. One day, surprising news arrived. The steppe trading caravan, which had been out roaming for over half a year, had finally returned. The leader, Yu Fu, had sent someone ahead with a personal letter. By the time the letter reached your hands, the caravan was still 3 days away from Hanyang City. 3 days to Hanyang. But that meant they were practically next door to Ruyang Commandery. Your eyes shifted, a plan forming in your mind. The caravan was bringing back so many good things. How could they not stop by the Ruyang Commandery construction site to pay a courtesy visit, have a drink of water, and rest their feet? With a sly grin, you immediately penned a reply to Yu Fu. Tell him that we're building a new city on the former Li tribe's land. Have him detour with his team, rest there for a day, check out the new developments, and then it wouldn't be too late to return to Hanyang. Yu Fu was also taken aback when he received the reply. The Han tribe was expanding so aggressively. Hanyang City had only just been completed, and they were already starting a new city. His interest in this new city instantly piqued. He immediately changed direction, leading his vast caravan towards the Ruyang Commandery construction site. They arrived the next morning. The following morning, at the Ruyang Commandery construction, Yurim, the people of the Yu tribe, rose early. Men and women, young and old, gathered around a large iron pot cooking breakfast. The pot was a good one, the only one the entire tribe possessed, earned through their labor. The food in the pot, however, left something to be desired. Boiled taro chunks. It filled their bellies, sure, but eating it every day made their mouths feel utterly bland. Still, this method of boiling food, soup and all, was something they had just learned from the Han tribe. Compared to gnawing on roasted food every day like before, this was already considered gourmet. Just as the taro finished cooking and everyone prepared to eat, the whitish soup in the pot suddenly rippled. Immediately after, everyone felt the ground begin to tremble. Pressing their ears to the earth, they could even hear a rumbling sound, like muffled thunder approaching from afar. What was happening? Yu, too, the chief of the Yu tribe, felt a surge of panic. He had never witnessed such a commotion. Over at another part of the construction site, Shuda had clearly noticed it too. He had cavalry under his command. The moment he heard that sound, he knew. It was the sound of a large number of heavy livestock stampeding. Coming from the south, possessing so many cattle and horses. Who else could it be? It had to be that kid Yu Fu. Back Shuda felt incredibly disgruntled. I, a distinguished military commander, have been stuck here supervising earth digging all year round with no battles to fight. Why does he, Yu Fu, a mere trader, get to swagger around everywhere with 2 banners worth of heavy cavalry? Infuriating. It's intolerable. No, next time I must talk to the chief. I want to go to the steppes too. I can fight too. Who wants to spend all day hauling bricks and mixing mud here? It's too demeaning. The more Shuda thought about it, the more stifled he felt. Yu Fu's caravan arrived quickly. Leading the way was a pack of frolicking sheepdogs, followed by a dense black mass of cattle, horses and sheep stretching as far as the eye could see, interspersed with a few caravan members on horseback. At the very back, swaying slowly along in a large cart, was undoubtedly Yu Fu himself. The Yu tribe people didn't recognize Yu Fu, but they recognized the Han tribe's style, especially the few riders at the front. The silver crowns on their heads sparkled brightly, identical to Shu Da's. Even more shocking was the overwhelming horde of cattle, horses, sheep. There looked to be 2,000 or 3,000 head of cattle and horses, and the rest were all dirty, fluffy sheep, covering the mountains and plains, too numerous to count. Probably even Yu Fu himself didn't know the exact number. So many livestock, and they all belonged to the Han tribe. The people of the Yu tribe were completely dumbfounded. No wonder the Han tribe was so powerful. Their entire tribe, men and women, young and old combined, didn't even amount to the number of oxen the Han tribe used for plowing. With such a disparity in strength, what was the point in even comparing? They didn't stand a chance. Seeing so many cattle, Yu Tu's first thought was plowing. He had witnessed the power of ox-drawn plows in the Han tribe, and his eyes turned red with envy. He sidled up to Shu Da, rubbing his hands together, and cautiously made his request, hoping to trade for a few oxen. Shu Da, already irritated with Yu Fu, wasn't in a good mood towards Yu Tu either, and put on a stern face immediately. "Hey, Chief Yu! What are you thinking? There are plenty of oxen here, but our Han tribe is short on them too. How much newly cleared land is waiting for oxen? Where would we find spares to trade to you?" After a pause, Shu Da's tone shifted, and he chuckled slyly. "However, it's not entirely impossible." "What way?" Yu Tu quickly asked. "Join our Han tribe, of course," Shu Da coaxed, like a big bad wolf tempting a little white rabbit. "As long as you join us, the chief will definitely distribute oxen everywhere." "Will you still need to beg then?" "Ridiculous. Don't even think about it. Joining is the right path." Yu Tu. Damn it, it always comes back to joining the Han tribe. But if they didn't join, he could see his tribe's morale crumbling. His people didn't care about independence. They followed whoever could feed them and protect them. If their bellies weren't full, who would recognize him as chief? Right then, chaos was unfolding. Several Yu tribe children, naked as jaybirds, rushed into the flock of sheep, each grabbing a lamb and refusing to let go. Meat, want meat, skins, need clothes. By the looks of it, they intended to perform an on-the-spot skinning and eating service. A dozen fierce sheepdogs immediately snarled and charged forward, ready to bite the children to death and retrieve the lambs. Yu tribe warriors quickly raised their spears, blocking the dogs to protect their children. But the children had their reasons too. The Yu tribe ate taro at every meal. They were practically turning into taro. Want meat? Fish in the river were hard to catch, and the wild animals in the forest, perhaps scared off by the Han tribe, were pitifully few. Any game caught barely provided a mouthful for each of the nearly 500 mouths. As autumn deepened and the cold wind began to blow, these naked children didn't even have a scrap of animal hide. If things continued like this, lacking meat for calories and skins for warmth, it was uncertain if they could even survive the winter. The children weren't stupid. This was the instinct for survival. They wanted to live. So they snatched the Han tribe's sheep, wanting meat, wanting leather clothes. It was that simple. The standoff continued. Just then, Yu Fu, who had been lagging behind the main group, finally rode up slowly on his horse. He immediately spotted Shu Da, wearing his silver crown, glaring darkly at the group of children. "Yo, Shu Da," Yu Fu grinned, dismounting to greet him. "An old acquaintance, haven't seen you in half a year, thought you'd gotten promoted." Shu Da ignored him completely, his eyes still fixed on the children as if trying to freeze them with his stare. Yu Fu noticed the commotion up ahead and asked curiously, "Shu Da, what's going on? What's the situation? Who are those people? New recruits of our chief?" Wanting clothes, wanting to live, such humble requests. Yet even these simple demands the Yu tribe couldn't fulfill. The heart of one child's mother felt like it was being pierced by knives. She looked at her child shivering in the autumn wind, tears welling in his eyes, then at her own dumbstruck chief Yu Tu, and finally at the Han tribe's endless livestock and carts piled high with animal hides. For the past month, watching the Han tribe members eat white rice, wear warm clothes, and walk in shoes without fear of sharp objects, could they not be envious? The barefoot aren't afraid of the shod. Bullshit. The barefoot dream of wearing shoes, even. Animals have affection for their young, let alone humans. There were no spare hides in the tribe. Should she just watch her child wait to die in the cold wind? Now the chance was right before her. Join them. Just say the word, and her child could live. Don't say it. How could she face the child she carried for 10 months and risked her life to bring into the world? Tears blurred the woman's vision. She suddenly gritted her teeth, made up her mind, and pushed her child towards Yu Fu. Then, hardening her heart, she turned away, tears streaming down her face. Let him join your tribe. The chief, I'll handle him. Take him away. She knew that staying with her, the child might not survive the winter. Handing him over to the Han tribe, at least he could live. The child stumbled from the push, falling to the ground, still clutching the lamb. Hearing his mother's words, he froze for a moment, then burst into earth-shattering sobs. He dropped the lamb and turned, clinging desperately to his mother's leg. "Mama! I don't want clothes. I'll stay with Mama. I won't go." "Go. You can live if you go with them. They have everything. Go!" The mother cruelly pushed him away again and again, and the child just cried and crawled back each time. Mother and child were heartbroken, finally clinging to each other, weeping controllably. Several other children and adults holding lambs nearby were also moved, putting down the lambs and quietly wiping away tears while holding onto their own parents. The wailing finally jolted the still dazed Yu awake. He watched the scene silently, without a word. Your words seemed to echo in his ears again. You are also a chief. You have the power to make your people's lives better, yet you don't do it. Are you still fit to be chief? Can you face your people? Who? After a long moment, Yu let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping. The conviction he had held on to for so long seemed impossible to bear any longer. After today's incident, if he still refused to join the Han tribe, he couldn't guarantee that someone wouldn't sneak up behind him one night, smash his head with a shovel, and then defect to the Han tribe. Or perhaps it would be those naked little kids. Don't underestimate them. They could sneak up with a rock at night and end his life. The Yu tribe was on the verge of mutiny. Should he continue to resist stubbornly and be killed by his own people? Or lead everyone to join the Han tribe and maybe secure a position as a clan leader? Yu chose to follow his heart. Under the gaze of all his tribe's people, he walked over to the crying mother and child and Yu Fu. The little boy's swollen red eyes held a fierce glint that made Yu's heart tremble. This kid might actually want to kill me. He pretended not to notice, turned to Yu Fu, composed his face, and declared with righteous gravity, "I am their chief. I, Yu, am willing to lead all my people to join the Han tribe. Please, please give these children some clothes." All the Yu tribe members were stunned at first, then erupted in earth-shattering cheers of joy. From now on, they were also part of the Han tribe. Yu Fu stroked his beard, smiled faintly, calm and unperturbed. Shu Da, however, nearly fainted from anger. Damn it all. I worked my ass off for nearly 2 months. I was just about to pocket this achievement, and Yu Fu show up and steal my credit right at the finish line? Fuck, where's my knife? Damn you. I'm going to hack that bastard to pieces. Shu Da roared inwardly, his liver aching with fury. The news quickly traveled back to Hanyang City via wooden boat. Yu listened to the report without much reaction. Yu had experienced too many things like this. In 2 years, the Han tribe had absorbed and integrated 80, if not 100 tribes. A mere Yu tribe was well within your expectations. To you, this was just another step in the plan. Nothing to make a fuss about. Yu Fu had returned. A grand procession, bringing back so many cattle and horses it practically blinded your titanium alloy dog eyes. Several thousand head. It sounded like a lot. Looked like even more, a dense black mass like a massive moving sail from a step relocation company. You did some mental calculation. How did this number come about? They had set out with nearly 300 horses. Although there weren't that many people, those 70 heavy cavalrymen came with a buy one, get two free configuration. 3 horses per man, so the base number of horses was already significant. A round of friendly exchanges, plus 0 cost. Acquisitions on the steppe yielded a bumper harvest. First, they scored big with the Shin tribe. Those guys didn't have carts, relying entirely on cattle and horses to haul their possessions. Goods that you could handle with one cart probably required a long line of a dozen or so animals for them. The Shin tribe had accumulated wealth through continuous trading along their route, and now it all belonged to the Han surname. Then there were those wealth-bringing boys from the Snow Wolf tribe. 500 cavalry trying to rob them? They were cut down like melons and vegetables by the Han tribe in the first encounter, losing over 100 men, and nearly 300 horses were casually borrowed in the process. They too had the lavish setup of 2 or 3 horses per person. Although there were no further clashes, when your people caught up to their main camp, they managed to persuade them, with silver tongues and fists, to part with several hundred more fine horses. Through these 2 interactions, the Han tribe had practically won the lottery. Besides these lively assets, there were mountains of spoils, especially the large amount of sea salt confiscated from the Shin tribe. Combined with the goods you brought yourselves, it was like pooling the resources of 2 major tribes for a shopping spree. How could the livestock exchange not be numerous? It was practically a mobile ranch, grazing wherever they went. No, adding wherever they went. With so many cattle and horses, the tribe's strength shot up with a duang, but a new problem arose. How to feed them? Several thousand mouths, especially several thousand horses, all crammed in one place, would probably graze the land bare, just eating grass. There wasn't enough fodder. Cattle, sheep, donkeys, and alpacas were different. These unfussy eaters would happily chew on corn stalks, belonging to the hardy economical type. But try shoving the same stuff in front of Lord Horse? They probably wouldn't even bother rolling their eyes. They demand fine feed. What's fine? Feed? Top-grade alfalfa, or at least wheat and barley straw. Rice straw was barely acceptable. Depending on their workload, they also needed high-energy snacks like fruits, vegetables, and beans. Raising fat, strong horses required more pampering than caring for ancestors. This demanding 5-star feeding standard, your current Han tribe, really couldn't quite handle it. You looked at the letter in your hand, though it wasn't explicitly stated you understood. So angry you almost performed an on-the-spot explosion. Damn it! The fortune I painstakingly saved up for years. You wasteful brat actually wants to slaughter them for meat? Why don't you go eat shit instead? You mentally unleashed a torrent of abuse at Dashu, the letter writer. Selling off the family inheritance, without a second thought. Still fuming after cursing, you unfolded the letter again, scrutinizing it, getting angrier the more you looked. Who the hell said primitive people were stupid? You really wanted to give them a big slap. These people were the definition of cunning, cunning squared. They were blatantly exploiting the loopholes of the communal system, ganging up to freeload off your Han tribe. Luoyang Commandery started infrastructure projects last winter, recruiting people for land reclamation, and gradually attracted quite few people. But compared to this current ill wind, those earlier numbers were nothing. Why didn't they come sooner or later, but specifically rush over like they'd seen a free canteen just as winter was about to freeze their butts off? The answer was 2 words: free food. The communal system, an echo of the big pot rice era. Although families cooked separately now, the food source was still uniformly distributed by the tribe. These tribes making their grand entrance in late autumn had calculated perfectly. It's autumn now, everyone's hoarding grain for winter. Why should we bother hoarding our own grain? Isn't being lazy much more comfortable? Let's just defect to the Han tribe. You're recruiting anyway. We arrive before winter. The work is mostly done, just in time for you to distribute grain. Once we join, we're your own people. You can't just watch us starve, right? This was absolutely a premeditated, organized, strategic freeloading operation. They held back for a whole year, contributed nothing, and now, just as winter was approaching, and most farm work was stopping, they arrived in droves with their families. Where were you earlier? This wasn't targeted poverty alleviation, this was targeted laziness alleviation. You slammed the table in the empty classroom, furious. But what good was anger? The problem still needed solving. The grain supply was finite, but the number of mouths was growing exponentially. It was quickly becoming a situation of too many monks and too little gruel. You couldn't just let the population you'd worked so hard to attract starve, could you? After venting your anger and cursing your fill, your brain's CPU started whirring again. The letter said that at this rate, Ruyang Commandery's population breaking 30,000 was a certainty. So the question was, with the existing granaries, how do you feed these 30,000 plus hungry mouths? This problem was quite severe. Ruyang Commandery had just started. The area of cultivated land wasn't large, and rice had only been planted for one season, unavoidable given the late start. Although corn was planted immediately after the rice harvest, you feared there wasn't enough time. If the corn didn't ripen, those precious seeds would be wasted, so the grain yield was limited. Even if another wave of corn could be harvested, before winter it would be a drop in the bucket compared to the massive population base. There were just too many people. Grain wasn't enough, but your mind shifted. If there's no rice, isn't there still meat? Ruyang Commandery's animal husbandry was indeed doing well. Just the Saiga antelopes and purchased sheep numbered over 10,000. There were also large numbers of cattle and horses, but these were valuable tools of production, not to be touched lightly. Oh right, and there were those pig teammates, the flower pigs. Ever since the Lu tribe joined, Ruyang Commandery had been frantically breeding flower pigs. The strategy was simple. Keep them, let them breed like crazy, but rarely slaughter them. After a few months, the newly born piglets were already half a meter long. The entire herd had snowballed from the initial 600 or 700 to nearly 3,000. There was no helping it. Pigs have terrifying reproductive capabilities. Look at the 2 rows of launchers on a sow's belly. A litter of 8 or 10 was standard, and 14 or 15 wasn't unheard of. Just breeding without culling it was hard for the numbers not to explode. But looking at these grunting treasures, you were still reluctant to be ruthless. This was the foundation of the entire Han tribe's domestic pig population. In the 3+ years you'd been here, you'd only found domesticated pigs with the Lu tribe. All breeding stock came from them. No other breeds had been discovered yet, so how could you not treasure them? These were the future second brother pigs, an allusion to Zhu Bajie from Journey to the West, to be promoted throughout the Great Han territory. How could they be offed now just to fill bellies? Since that was the case, the only solution lay in the 4 words: increase income, reduce expenditure. First, reduce expenditure. With more people, tastes also diversified. The good old days of eating hearty meals without restraint had to be paused. Belts had to be tightened. They had to learn to be stingy. Previously, with fewer people, Ruyang Commandery had 3 meals a day, at least 2 of which were white rice. This was probably one reason that attracted those opportunists. Now, no longer possible. Expenditure must be drastically reduced. Make these freeloaders less comfortable. You stroked your chin, a sly glint in your eyes. Then change it to 2 meals of thin congee a day, the kind so watery you can see your reflection in it. Beyond reducing expenditure, there was increasing income. Not enough grain, supplement with other foods? Ruyang Commandery, which you once jokingly called sheep-leaving commandery, now lived up to its name. There really were a lot of sheep, and they reproduced quickly. These creatures could date at 1 year old and become parents at 1.5, practically walking protein photocopiers. Not culling some would be an insult to their vigorous life force. Plus, slaughtering them early would save a lot of fodder for other livestock over the winter. You decisively made the call. Cull half first, 5,000, starting with the old, weak, sick, and disabled. Salt them down quickly for meat. Congee in the winter. As for other livestock, large-scale slaughter was out of the question. Increasing income couldn't just focus on your own pens. You had to look elsewhere. This season, for a settlement built near water, what was the most suitable? Reserve food? It had to be the fish in the river. Now was the peak season for marine fish migrating upstream to spawn. You had already noticed the return of fish schools in the river these past few days, and Hanyang City had organized manpower to start netting them, with astonishingly large catches. You had observed the habits of these fish for 3 years, and gained some understanding. They were saltwater fish that returned to freshwater in autumn to spawn. After spawning, they didn't plan on going back, just wandered around in the freshwater until the end of their lives. The newly hatched fry grew up in the river, spent the winter there, and then followed their ancestors' call back to the sea. So these post-spawning fish moms and dads, even if you didn't catch them, they'd die sooner or later anyway. Might as well catch them since they're free. The small river near Hanyang City was less than 10 meters wide, and only a few meters deep, making fishing relatively easy. Lots of fish, narrow river. Where could they run? But the situation in Ruyang Commandery was different. Dashu had tried fishing, but the river there was as wide as a small Jiang river, maybe 100 meters across and bottomlessly deep. There were more fish, but the river was too big. Fish weren't stupid. Who would hang around the shallow banks? Most frolicked in the middle of the river. This increased the difficulty of fishing n-fold. Could fish be caught? Yes, but too few. Ruyang Commandery's current fishery output was only enough for the city residents to occasionally supplement their diet, a rare treat. Relying on fish as a staple reserve? Harder than reaching the heavens. It wasn't that the fishing methods you taught were ineffective. It was that the population base had changed. Before, 100 people ate 2,000 fish. Now 30,000 people were hoping for this meager amount, not even enough to pick their teeth with. You rubbed your throbbing temples, watching so many walking boiled fish fillies roaming freely at the bottom of the river, yet being unable to catch them. How could this stand? To catch fish in the big river, the top priority was boat building. At least 3 or 4 decent boats were needed to go out to the middle of the river, cast large nets, and perform a clean sweep. But the biggest bottleneck for this plan was, again, the same old problem: no boats. Ruyang Commandery was a new city. Although it had a windmill-powered sawmill, it was still busy producing building materials and tools. Where was the spare capacity to build large boats? A small boat had been built previously, specifically for contacting the Ling tribe. But now, that lonely little boat on the wide river surface practically screamed a drop in the bucket and desolation. The current pitiful fish catch relied entirely on this small boat. Want to build new boats? Theoretically possible, but time was pressing. Materials might also be insufficient. You felt your head starting to ache again. Meanwhile, construction. Projects in various locations were proceeding in full swing. Over at Fuma Pass, the first Earn City wall already stood like a stout man. Built on flat ground without a moat, the wall had to be high. This wall was primarily for defense, needing to be tall and imposing, with a wide top for mounting ballistae or perhaps cannons. A bold idea flashed through your mind. 15 meters high, 8 meters wide at the base and 6 meters wide at the top, it formed a massive trapezoidal earth mound. This was a precaution against certain giant ape monsters. Taller and sturdier was always better. Ying Rui acted like a foreman, relentlessly overseeing the slaves' work. He had personally witnessed the terrifying sight of ape men besieging a city. So now that you tasked him with building defenses, he was more diligent than anyone. Without a moat, they relied entirely on the wall's toughness. It had to be built to super-reinforced standards. As for Phase 2 work like facing it with bricks, that would have to wait until there were more people. With the current manpower, just getting the earthen wall rammed into place was a blessing. Duer's team in the valley hadn't been idle either, sending good news. They not only found streams, but also followed them to discover a small waterfall. Below the waterfall was a deep, crystal-clear pool, the water crashing down with a thunderous roar. Although this waterfall served little purpose beyond providing drinking water, it was the first one discovered by the Han tribe, making it a minor, scenic spot. Duer and his team immediately adjusted their plan, diverting the stream water to increase the flow, and dug a winding channel straight into the heart of the valley, feeding into a pond. This solved Fuma Pass's drinking water and partial irrigation needs. They also built a sluice gate where the waterfall pool met the channel to control the downstream water volume and prevent flooding. Once this reservoir was complete, future villages built between Fuma Pass and Hanyang City could draw water directly from here, solving half the major problem of irrigation water. The land clearing supervised by Shitu was also proceeding simultaneously. They first cut a fire break around the designated city site. Then, on a calm day, set fire to the planned area, burning it clean. Afterwards, they began logging in the valleys on both sides, trimming branches and piling them in the mountains, while stacking the logs nearby, ready for formal city construction next year. By the end of the 9th month, Hanyang City had impressively produced 6 new wooden boats. Like diligent ants, they constantly shuttled between Hanyang Commandery and Ruyang Commandery, transporting nutrients to the new city. Thanks to the wholesale absorption of the Yu tribe, Ruyang Commandery already had 1,200 permanent residents. Coupled with those coming daily from Hanyang City to help, the total population reached 1,500, barely forming the rudiments of a town. More Yu tribespeople, now the Yu clan, a surname bestowed by Yu, traveled by boat to Hanyang City to transport supplies, incidentally conducting an on-site inspection of their new boss's strength. Seeing the thriving life in Hanyang City, they became even more convinced that defecting to the Han tribe had been a wise decision. The beautiful life before them could also be achieved in their new home through their own hands. The benefits of joining the Han tribe were immediate. Supplies that previously had to be earned through labor, boatloads of porcelain, pottery, buckets, iron pots, iron tools, farm implements, cloth, were now shipped to the Ruyang Commandery Bank seemingly for free. Every newly joined tribesperson, whether from the Gaoshan tribe or the original Yu tribe, was overjoyed, cheering enthusiastically. Holding exquisite utensils and wearing warm woolen clothes, they began to feel proud from the bottom of their hearts to be members of the Han tribe. Other tribes didn't have these good things. Dishu, stationed in Ruyang Commandery, received your instructions and also began implementing the increase income, reduce expenditure policy. He organized the swarming wild people, you still held some resentment towards these freeloaders, to reclaim wasteland, assigning tasks by family unit and dispatching personnel to measure and verify the work. Although these unruly people were extremely reluctant, they could only pinch their noses and do it. Otherwise, they'd be driven out of the city to face the harsh elements. Some tribes that had just arrived and hadn't formally completed the naturalization process saw the situation and had no choice but to bite the bullet and join the land reclamation army. Why? With only a month left until winter, having wasted too much time on the road, they had no time to stockpile winter supplies. Turning back now likely meant freezing or starving to death in the mountains. It was better to honestly reclaim a few acres of land in exchange for residency. The old-timers of Ruyang Commandery also looked down their noses at these newcomers. Why should their 3 full meals a day be reduced to 2 bowls of thin congee just because these people arrived? Their stomachs were rumbling. So, even if you hadn't ordered the newcomers to reclaim land, these freeloaders who appeared out of nowhere to share the grain supply were already unpopular. If you don't contribute to the tribe, how dare you eat the grain we grew? This was likely the shared sentiment of the long-term residents. Ruyang Commandery's population swelled like an inflating balloon. God knows where they all came from. All that was known was they came from the south. Their specific origins were unclear, and even if they were, no one in the Han tribe could read a map anyway. Since the newcomers had cleared land, they needed places to live. Luxurious brick houses were out of the question. Dashu could only hastily plan another settlement and urgently construct adobe huts. Winter was imminent, and building brick houses was too slow. They had to make do with rammed earth houses for now. Although simple, they had the necessary features, like walls and roofs, and most importantly, these earthen houses weren't afraid of fire, allowing for heated beds, kang, for warmth. This was a crucial lifesaver in winter. The application for the new settlement's construction was sent to you, requesting a name. You thought for a moment. The previous two subsidiary settlements were called Lin's Township and Shangtian Township, so let this one be called Fengyi Township, hoping it would have abundant food and clothing in the future. You approved Dashu's construction application and naming, but your heart felt a mix of emotions. According to your plan, Ruyang Commandery, situated on a plain with convenient land and water transport, was the ideal location for the future capital, potentially developing into a metropolis of hundreds of thousands. But reality was harsh. The current Ruyang Commandery couldn't even sustain itself. Winter grain supplies still required you, the great chief, to rack your brains to procure. Talking about a capital city was truly nonsense. Sigh. After dealing with these miscellaneous matters, you began focusing on your own main business, silk. The people of the Sang clan had already collected a large quantity of wild tussa silkworm cocoons, but they had no idea how to turn these fuzzy cocoons into smooth fabric. You, the technical director, had to personally step in. In a corner of the spinning workshop, a heavily modified spinning machine stood quietly. Compared to the original version in your memory, it was already unrecognizable. A specially made rectangular iron basin was mounted on the reeling machine, with charcoal burning in the stove beneath. High temperature, little smoke, affordable for ordinary households. The iron basin was divided into 4 sections by partitions, resembling a mini yin-yang hot pot, a hot pot divided into 2 sections. The onlookers were completely bewildered. You initially wanted to explain the principle, but then decided against it. They might not understand anyway. Practice makes perfect. You cleared your throat and began directing the Han tribe's first official silk reeling. Put the selected cocoons into the hot water and stir gently with chopsticks. Remember, 8 cocoons in each trough. Begin. The operators were Sangkyo, the Sang clan chief, and the translator she brought. They carefully counted the cocoons from the wicker basket, exactly 8 per trough, and placed them into the steaming iron basin. Few days earlier, Sung Kyu had asked you why it had to be exactly 8 silk filaments combined into one thread. Couldn't 5 or 6 work? Honestly, you scratched your head. This piece of knowledge came from your childhood teacher who loved raising silkworms. The specific principle, you were a bit fuzzy on it too. Silk filament was incredibly fine, like 1/10 the width of a human hair. Too fine was indeed difficult to spin. But then you remembered the plain silk gauze garment, thin as cicada wings, unearthed from Mawangdui in your previous life, an entire robe that could fit into a matchbox. How did the ancients weave silk so light and thin? You'd bet your life. They didn't use 8 filaments combined. Perhaps the ancients used a finer combination of 2 or 3 threads. Your mind was full of question marks, but for now it was best to test the waters with the 8-strand method your teacher taught. Meanwhile, construction projects in various locations were proceeding in full swing. On another front, a major breakthrough in cultural development. The first batch of movable clay-type characters had finally been carved. Looking at the densely packed small clay blocks, your heart blossomed with joy. 5,000 or 6,000 commonly used characters, at least 10 carved for each, some dozens, totaling tens of thousands. This was the result of mobilizing all 300 students in the school, working diligently for several months. Although currently there was only one size, 8mm square, which seemed small, compared to the printed characters in modern books from your memory, they were already giants, about as thick as a regular cigarette butt. Fire them. They must be fired, you decided decisively. Fire a batch first and see how the printing effect is. If it doesn't work, we'll switch materials. But speaking of switching materials, inspiration struck. I have an idea that might solve it once and for all. Chief, what does solve it once and for all mean? Bai Chi beside you looked like a curious baby. Once and for all means we work hard this one time, and in the future we'll never have to painstakingly carve characters again. Plus, we only need to carve each character once to replicate heaps of them. You smiled faintly, proud of your genius idea. What? Movable clay blocks? Can be copied? Bai Chi was so shocked his jaw almost hit the floor, his eyes screaming, "Are you kidding me? This isn't scientific. You're insulting my intelligence." He had personally carved characters with his classmates for months. He understood the hardship. But hearing it from your mouth, he somehow felt it was reliable. After all, you, the chief, were the omnipotent son of heaven, sent by the heavens, that's right. You nodded affirmatively. Using metal movable type. We can use a tin lead alloy to cast the type. Of course, to truly solve it once and for all, metal type alone isn't enough. We first need to create a set of matrices. With the matrices as standard templates, whenever we want to cast a character in the future, just take out the mold, clank, pour it, and a piece of type comes out. No more carving one by one. And if these matrices are well maintained, they can be passed down to descendants thousands of years later. The more you thought, the more excited you became. Oh my God, why didn't I think of this earlier? Your mind was crystal clear. The rabbit families, China's printing technology, led the world for thousands of years. From woodblock to movable type, materials like wood, clay, copper, tin, and lead were all tried. Although metal movable type wasn't widely adopted due to various reasons, you had no intention of repeating those mistakes. The winding path trodden by your ancestors for millennia had essentially highlighted the key points and pointed to the correct answer for you. Wooden movable type? It absorbed ink and deformed, becoming useless after a few uses, and carving was laborious. Bisheng's fixing technique using resin and wax was a nightmare to dismantle and clean after printing, more troublesome than woodblock, driving perfectionists mad. Clay movable type? It didn't absorb water and deform, but early methods still used adhesive, making dismantling difficult. Later, wooden frames were used for compression fixing, making assembly and disassembly much easier, finally giving movable type printing a boost. But both wooden and clay types weren't durable, so someone thought of metal movable type. But problems arose again. Copper type? Too expensive. Copper was hard currency in ancient times. Using money to cast type was something only emperors could afford. Later came tin type, cheaper, but like copper type, it had a fatal flaw. It couldn't hold ink. Well, ancient inks were water-based, and water beads up on metal surfaces, resulting in terrible print quality. It wasn't until lead type appeared later, after printing technology spread to Europe, was improved by them, and then transmitted back. Why did metal movable type take off so well in the West? Firstly, they had fewer letters, just a few dozen, used repeatedly, making sorting and typesetting efficient. Secondly, they used oil-based ink. Oil-based ink adheres evenly to metal surfaces. Combining these two advantages, Western metal movable type printing took flight. But these problems that plagued the ancients for thousands of years were non-issues for you. First, cost. The currency you established was copper and silver. Movable type would be made from cheap tin and lead, perfectly avoiding the pitfall of using money to cast type. Moreover, tin and lead have melting points of only 200 to 300 degrees Celsius, making smelting and casting costs ridiculously low. You could melt them in an iron pot with some firewood. Charcoal might not even be necessary. Second, ink. You already knew the perfect match for metal type was oil-based ink. And oil-based ink, for the current Han tribe, was practically abundant. Not to mention animal fats like lard, beef tallow, and mutton fat. There were tongue oil, lacquer oil, peanut oil, soybean oil, hemp seed oil, several types of vegetable oil alone. Even pine nuts from the mountains could be pressed for oil, though the yield was lower. Substitute oil for water, grind in ink sticks, and the simplest oil-based ink was made. Which one works best? Just try a few times, right? Easy peasy. As for ink sticks, the ink kilns on the mountain had never stopped production. The output was sufficient to support the entire tribe. After all, among the current population of tens of thousands, fewer than 2,000 could write, and those who could write several thousand characters were exceedingly rare, not even totaling 500. With such a small number of literate people, how much ink could they possibly use? Finally, there was the core method of your once-and-for-all solution: create matrices, then mass-cast movable type. You thought long-term. Once culture spreads, in 80 or 100 years, the demand for printing books will surely skyrocket. You can't just let the government do all the printing, right? There will definitely be private printing workshops. What will they do then? Carve movable type from scratch themselves? Too wasteful of manpower and resources? That's when your matrices come in handy. Want to open a private printing house? No problem, just apply to the government. The government takes out the standard matrices, casts a set of movable type for you using lead-tin alloy, and you just pay the fee. Convenient, cost-effective, and ensures standardized fonts. As for whether private individuals could afford it, you thought it was entirely feasible. Lead and tin, while valuable, being metals, weren't that valuable. Copper and silver were currency, iron-made tools and weapons. Lead and tin, aside from small amounts used in bronze alloys, had limited individual uses. Tin could be used as solder. Lead, in this era, was practically useless except for making type. Combined with the super low melting point and smelting cost, the price of making movable type, even including labor fees, wouldn't be exorbitant. Just think about it. Inexpensive metal movable type, widespread adoption, private printing workshops spring up everywhere, explosive increase in the number of books, dramatic drop in book prices, accelerated cultural transmission, popularization of education. Everyone has books to read and schooling. The people gain knowledge and insight. The nation becomes prosperous and strong. This was simply a monumental undertaking, benefiting the nation and its people for generations to come. The more you thought about it, the more excited you became, itching to roll up your sleeves and get started immediately. No sooner said than done. You immediately dispatched Bai Chi to test the first batch of fired clay movable type, if successful. Simultaneously, you had Da Zui quickly prepare a large batch of wax ingots. You were going to use the lost wax method to first carve a set of master type molds. Incidentally, you also had him reclaim all the tribe's early bronze farming tools, axes, and the like, replacing them with iron ones, to melt down for making the type molds. The tasks were assigned with urgency. Da Zui was highly efficient. That very day, he brought you a huge pile of wax ingots. Speaking of which, since iron tools became common, the Han tribe hadn't used the lost wax method for casting in a long time, and all this wax had been lying idle. The wax blocks were ready, and the next day you began leading the 300 students plunging into a vigorous campaign of carving type molds. This time, you were carving type molds, the reusable seeds, so only one needed to be carved for each character. You took the lead yourself, using a pencil to draw character grids on paper. Then, wielding your brush, you wrote out 10,000 unique Chinese characters. Pay attention. This time, you were carving standard, non-reversed characters. Because these were for making the molds. The molds had to be standard so that the cast movable type would be reversed, ensuring the final print was standard. Compared to carving the clay movable type before, this was incredibly fast. Previously, for the clay type, dozens had to be carved for each character, multiplying the workload for several thousand common characters more than tenfold. Plus, the students were inexperienced, making progress as slow as a snail. But now things were different. You assigned 35 characters to each of the 300 students, totaling over 10,000. and had them finish carving within 2 class periods, just over 2 hours. Because they had gained extensive experience carving the clay type, their techniques were now skillful. Moreover, the wax ingots were soft, making carving easy and smooth, and carving standard characters was even more straightforward. The faster students finished in half an hour. Seeing this efficiency, you felt inwardly delighted. In just one day, a complete set of type molds, wax molds, containing over 10,000 characters was finished. Lightning speed. The next day, you had Dazui collect the carved wax molds. Dye. Zui's team mixed white fire-resistant kaolin clay into a paste, inserted the wax molds, let the paste air dry, then heated it to pour out the melted wax, resulting in precise ceramic mold cavities. The melted wax blocks were then cut into wax ingots of a different size and sent back to you. Upon receiving the new wax ingots, you immediately organized the students to carve a second set of over 10,000 wax molds in a different size. Meanwhile, Dazui, having received the first batch of ceramic molds, wasn't idle either. He immediately began smelting lead ore to produce the first batch of lead ingots. By the third day, once the ceramic molds were completely dry, following your instructions, he melted down the reclaimed bronze farming tools in the furnace. Then, he smelted an alloy by combining bronze and lead in a 1-to-1 ratio. This lead-bronze alloy had a melting point of only around 600 degrees Celsius, greatly reducing the difficulty of casting. Next, he poured this alloy into the ceramic. Mold cavities clang, clang. The first batch of sturdy, durable metal type molds, standard characters, emerged. And by this time, you had already finished leading the students in carving the third size of wax molds. In the following days, you led the students in frantically carving wax molds, while Dazui led the artisans in frantically casting metal type molds. The efficiency was incredible. In just 1 week, you obtained 5 sizes of lead-bronze alloy type molds totaling tens of thousands of pieces. The smallest had sides of 5 millimeters, about the size of characters in modern printed books. The largest had sides of 2 centimeters. These 5 sizes were National Standard Size 1, 5 millimeter, Size 2, 8 millimeter, Size 3, 1 centimeter, Size 4, 1.5 centimeters, and Size 5, 2 centimeter. They ranged from small enough for printing dictionary annotations to large enough for eye-catching public notices. With these 5 standard sets of type molds, you could basically meet all printing needs for a long time to come. Reference books, like dictionaries once printed, would definitely be bestsellers. You could sell as many as you could produce. Of course, the most crucial step was not yet complete. These metal-type molds were all standard characters. They were master molds that couldn't be used directly for printing. Their ultimate purpose was to mass-produce the actual printing type, reversed lead tin movable type. How to make them? Simple. First, prepare a wooden box and fill it with soft clay made from fire-resistant earth. When you need to cast a specific character, take the corresponding lead bronze master mold, standard character, place it face down, and press it firmly into the clay. Thwack! A clear reversed character mold cavity appears. Want to cast a dozen or so of one character? No problem. Use the same master mold to press multiple times on the clay slab. Once a full tray of mold cavities is ready, pour the molten, cheaper lead tin alloy, this is the material for the final movable type, over it. After cooling, a wrap on the tray and clatter a dozen or so identical, reversed metal movable type pieces fall out. This is the final product used for typesetting and printing. Just like that, you, leading 300 students, managed, in just 1 week, to leapfrog through the core technological chain of movable type printing, a process that might have taken other civilizations millennia to figure out. With these tens of thousands of sturdy, durable lead-bronze alloy master molds, you would never again have to painstakingly carve individual characters. Need new printing plates? Just take out the corresponding master molds, press rows of cavities into fire-resistant clay, and cast away. Used master molds were carefully cleaned, placed in soft, cloth-lined wooden boxes, coated with tung oil to prevent rust, and finally sealed for storage. Metal artifacts, properly maintained with oil, could last for 1,000 years without deteriorating. Chatisi, this point, the most critical piece of your grand blueprint for cultural transmission and the popularization of knowledge had finally, firmly fallen into place. Your goal was achieved. Another week slipped by quietly, while Hanyang City remained a scene of bustling construction. Inside the spinning workshop, Sang Chu led a group of female weavers, sweating over mountains of raw silk. Thousands of shimmering silk threads were ready, and she and Xiao Di were figuring out how to turn these treasures into the legendary silk fabric. The chill of late autumn? Non-existent. The workshop pulsed only with the heat of rolled-up sleeves and hard work. Next door, Dazui's metallurgy workshop wasn't idle either, the furnace fires burning brightly. Over the past 7 days, working, as if injected with stimulants, he had cast 5 complete sets of lead-tin movable type in different sizes. The small silvery blocks stood in rows like miniature seals, waiting to be inked, ready at any moment to imprint knowledge and spread. Civilization. Mutong's woodworking shop was even more tumultuous, arguably the busiest department in the entire settlement. One group was hard at work rushing to produce desks and chairs urgently needed for the school building. Another specialized in boat building, dreaming of setting sail. Yet another crew was responsible for producing various wooden implements. Machine parts, new types of farm tools, buckets, and a myriad of other things. Of course, these routine operations weren't the main focus. The key thing was that, over the past few days, you had secretly had them rush produce a batch of new items. Several huge cabinets with countless small compartments. Luxury apartments for the movable type. Wooden frames for typesetting. Brushes. Of various sizes, specialized workbenches, and so on. A setup that looked thoroughly professional. You hadn't been idle either. By day, you were the teacher imparting knowledge. By night, you transformed into a mysterious ink-mixing master. The base ink was still the old friend, pine soot ink, but you experimented extensively with the oil component. Peanut oil, linseed oil, lacquer tree seed oil, and tung oil. These 4 vegetable oils were favored in rotation, combined and tested repeatedly, all to find that miracle ink with explosive effectiveness. Practice yields true knowledge. Tung oil provided a waterproof quality, and the printed characters were indeed waterproof, but its strong odor was overpowering. Pass. Peanut oil worked reasonably well, but the ink dried as slowly as a crawling snail, maddeningly slow. Pass. Linseed oil and lacquer tree seed oil each had their merits. After countless trials and comparisons, you decisively settled on the golden ratio. 30% linseed oil, 60% lacquer, tree seed oil, 5% tung oil, thoroughly mixed and ground with pine soot. Powder. This custom ink was practically heaven sent. The linseed oil ensured clear, non-bleeding characters with strokes as sharp as if carved. The large proportion of lacquer tree seed oil provided superior adhesion, allowing ink application in one go, eliminating repetitive brushing and significantly reducing spoilage. The small amount of tung oil made the ink dry quickly and enhanced its brightness, giving the printed characters a subtle sheen and vibrant blackness. It might not seem extraordinary during the day, but reading under a dim oil lamp at night, the effect was stunning. The contrast was sharp, black against white, the characters almost seeming to leap off the page. While not quite reaching the level of fluorescent text, in an era without electric lights, this was an absolute blessing for night readers. Best of all, the abundant pine soot made the characters deeply black and emitted a faint scent of roasted pine wood, making the scholarly atmosphere almost tangible. Ink, paper, metal movable type, typesetting tools, printing implements, type sorting shelves, workbenches. Everything was ready, lacking only the east wind. Oh wait, no, lacking only the start of printing. Looking at the array of equipment produced through immense effort, you rubbed your hands together, itching with anticipation. Having invested so many resources, you had to achieve something significant. The printing workshop was finally set up on the top floor of a vacant school building, where 2 classrooms had been knocked together specifically to house the precious movable type and the books soon to be born. Huge type-sorting shelves lined the walls, holding the 5 sizes of metal type in order. Several large workbenches stood in the center of the room, displaying various printing tools. The adjacent room served as a storeroom for snow-white paper, jet-black ink, and future stacks of printed books, with a few tables in the corner designated for the final binding process. Everything was prepared by Chi, whom you had appointed as the printing workshop supervisor, arrived with 4 assistants ready to start work with gusto. However, reality quickly delivered a harsh slap in the face. The most basic and tedious step, type selection, hit a snag. This task of type selection wasn't difficult for you, a modern person with 9 years of compulsory education, proficient in pinyin and character radicals. But for Bai Chi and his group, who had only recently emerged from illiteracy, described somewhat hyperbolically as primitive people, it was like deciphering celestial script. Asking them to accurately find a specific character among the so vast sea of movable type, harder than reaching the heavens. It seemed for now you were the only one capable of doing this job. The first major pitfall of movable type printing had appeared so unexpectedly. The type selectors had to be literate. You first tried the method most familiar to you, pinyin sorting. You painstakingly arranged all the type pieces in pinyin order and labeled the shelves with small paper slips, AOEIUU. Holding a wooden tray containing the manuscript, you began searching for characters. First, find the consonant section, then the vowel section. It was indeed convenient to search this way, but after setting just 2 pages, you felt like crying. Damn it, I'm the only one here who knows pinyin. To typeset a whole book wouldn't. I worked myself to death in front of these type shelves. Pinyin wasn't feasible. You then tried the logic of the Wubi input method, searching by radicals and stroke count. It turned out to be even more troublesome. The fatal flaw was that whether using pinyin or radicals, only you understood the system. Without you, the printing workshop would grind to a halt. Teach them pinyin now? That would take forever and a day. Out of options, you had a flash of insight, or perhaps were forced into it out of desperation, and came up with a dumb method specifically for the current situation: create a catalog for all the movable type. Over 10,000 characters, each clearly listed by radical in a small booklet. This essentially served as a movable type dictionary. Instead of definitions, each character entry indicated its location: cabinet X, shelf Y, compartment Z. Now the operational procedure was clear. You looked up the location of a character in the catalog, then pointed and ordered, "Worker Wang, go to cabinet 3, top shelf, 5th compartment, and fetch the character Z." Then the type selector would hear the command, locate the character precisely, retrieve it and bring it back for your confirmation. Correct? On to the next. Once enough type for a page was gathered, it was brought to you for a second verification. After passing the second check, the type pieces were sent to another table for typesetting. The typesetter carefully arranged the metal type according to the page format, using small wooden blocks to fill empty spaces and secure the layout. Once set, the typesetter performed a third check against the manuscript. Only after confirming its accuracy was it sent to the printing station. The printer at the station received the printing plate and conducted the fourth and final verification. First checking for typos or incorrect characters, then ensuring every character was correctly oriented, none accidentally lying flat or standing on its head. Only when all 4 checks were passed could the process of inking and printing officially begin. Once this workflow combining the dumb method with quadruple checks was implemented, efficiency indeed shot up. It was much faster than when you were working alone, and the error rate was reduced to a minimum. Your inner self smugly put its hands on its hips. Bai Chi was the supervisor, so you assigned him to the most critical task of type selection, personally teaching him how to use the movable type dictionary. Fortunately, when you had taught them characters initially, you had done so by radicals, so Bai Chi had no trouble reading the catalog and learned very quickly. After assisting Bai Chi with selecting type for a dozen pages or so, you immediately reverted to your usual, hands-off manager style. Sitting down on a nearby chair, you watched Bai Chi operate independently, legs crossed. He finished selecting the type and brought it for your inspection. 0 errors. Excellent, the lad is teachable. Although the method was a bit clumsy, this process finally allowed the few people in the printing department to operate independently, no longer relying solely on you. You breathed a long sigh of relief, feeling the burden on your shoulders lighten considerably, and couldn't help giving yourself a mental thumbs up. Finally free. The first book printed by the workshop was the collection of poems and songs you had borrowed, and subsequently skillfully modified and profoundly summarized, compiled into a volume titled Selected Poems. The typesetting was also carefully considered. Each page featured one poem set in the eye-catching size 3 type. Below the poem were your added annotations and analysis set in the smallest size 1 type, giving it a professional and knowledgeable appearance. Each printing plate was used to make 3,000 impressions. The printed sheets were accumulated page by page, then trimmed, put in order, punched with holes and sewn together with thread, resulting in a quaint, traditional thread-bound book. Why thread binding? Considering the productivity and costs of this era, thread binding was the king of cost-effectiveness. It could be done with a single strand of yarn, making it cheap and quick, much better than using glue. Although glue binding might look more refined, in a primitive society where survival itself could be a challenge, practicality and cost were paramount. And so, the work of the printing department gradually fell into a routine. The workers became increasingly skilled, and both the quality and speed of printing steadily improved. You could finally entrust this operation to Bai Chi with peace of mind, enjoying some well-deserved leisure. However, just as you were engrossed in the grand enterprise of printing books, joyful news arrived from Xiao Die's side. The trial production of silk fabric was successful. This was absolutely uplifting news. It meant the Han tribe now possessed another game-changing technology capable of altering the world. In the future, this material could not only significantly improve the people's livelihood, but also become a flagship product for foreign trade, and furthermore, generate vast revenues for your administration, becoming a vital pillar of fiscal income. Just thinking about it was thrilling. You were invited to inspect the freshly produced silk. When you saw the undyed, pure white, smooth fabric, you froze. This texture, this color, no matter how you looked at it, it resembled the white silk used for hangings in period dramas. Your heart skipped a beat. Good heavens, this felt a bit intense. Forcing yourself to remain calm, you observed for a while. Besides your astonishment at the white silk, no, wait, at the silk itself, your keen eye spotted several areas on the loom that could be improved. You immediately called Mu Tong over and explained your ideas in detail. The next steps were modification and testing. Once the new version of the loom proved successful, mass production could be considered. But there was no rush. Industrializing silk production was a long-term project. It would take at least a year or two to reach scale. The immediate priority was to continue optimizing the equipment and solidify the foundation. In the following days, construction blossomed on all fronts throughout the Han tribe territory, while you remained firmly seated in Hanyang City, focusing intently on your role as the ambassador of cultural transmission. Printing books. Shu in Liuyang. Commandery wasn't idle either, sending you victory reports every few days. First, reporting how many new people he had managed to bring in. Second, reporting how many mu of wasteland these new laborers had reclaimed. And finally, the point he was most excited about, reporting on the growth of the 100 mu of corn. Chief, that corn is growing extremely well. Haven't seen the grain yet, but the leaves are big and green. The stalks thick and strong, absolutely perfect for feeding livestock. Reading the letter, you didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All right, at least before becoming a staple food, corn had found its niche in the feed industry. The impressive-looking cart, in the end, could not be taken back. This was a major source of worry for Elder Shang of the Shin tribe. But then he reconsidered. They hadn't planned on wholesale anyway. Getting a sample back to knock off was the real goal. If the whole cart wouldn't work, surely dismantling it into parts and transporting them by horse would. He didn't voice this thought. As an elder, his mind was sharp. In fact, on the way back, he had already figured it out. Even if they managed to get the whole cart back, they probably couldn't replicate it. Why? Lack of proper tools. Without suitable equipment, they couldn't even handle the woodwork properly. This reasoning was sound. Technological progress essentially walks on two legs: power and materials. The Shin tribe was currently hobbled on the materials leg. Lacking iron, they couldn't even muster decent bronze tools. Without the hard tools, even a clever housewife can't cook without rice. But thinking about this now was all hindsight. He was Elder Shang, in charge of trade. Developing tools was the technical department's job, completely unrelated to him. His current KPI was getting the cart back. Achieving that would have been a great success. Unfortunately, even this sole objective had failed, and at a heavy cost, including your threat to ban them from trading on the grasslands in the future. This was tantamount to cutting off their path to prosperity. Sigh. Elder Shang let out a heavy sigh. The thought of having to report back to the leader and hold a post-mortem meeting with the other elders made his head buzz, casting a gloomy pall over him. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, the cornfields turned golden, and winter was fast approaching. Da Shu had written a few days earlier asking how to harvest the corn. After all, it wasn't rice. They couldn't just harvest it haphazardly. In the early morning, the air was chilly, and people had already donned thick woolen clothes. Interestingly, everyone had assumed sickles would be needed to cut the corn, but your letter had said, no need for such trouble. Just go up and snap off those 2 ears of corn, cut down the remaining stalks and collect them properly. And so a large crowd surged into the cornfields. People lined up, divided the work by sections, and began picking the corn. The work wasn't tiring, just a bit itchy. The corn leaves and tassels brushed against their skin, a sensation anyone who experienced it would know, like being tickled by a mobile back-scratcher. But for the sake of the heavy ears of grain, what was a little skin irritation? It wasn't like they were losing their heads. The picked corn piled up into small mounds. Next came husking, but not completely. Some husk had to be left attached. Skillful hands used these husks to braid the ears of corn together into long strings, which were hung up like wind chimes to dry. Alternatively, the corn was husked completely and spread out on mats to sunbathe, though this depended on whether heaven favored them with bright sunshine. The next step was shelling. With no advanced technology available, it was all done by hand rubbing. Rubbing corn kernels, for those with idle hands, could even be considered an amusing pastime. Which child raised in the countryside didn't have a few calluses rubbed onto their hands? By the time all the corn was harvested, it was already early November. Around the transition from the beginning to the end of the month was the time for the major low tide in the bay between the mainland and Bamboo Island. The moment Elder Shang and his group had eagerly awaited, the time to go home, had finally arrived. A dozen or so people stepped gingerly onto the wet, slippery reef path. This road home stretched over 10 kilometers, littered with pitted rocks covered in slimy seaweed and dense layers of shellfish excrement, a natural obstacle course. But eager to return home, this difficulty couldn't stop them. They had to race against time, against the rising tide. Fortunately, they had rested for over half a month during their house arrest by you, regaining their strength. Otherwise, they might have been pushed back to your terrifying shore by the relentless sea halfway through. The journey, which would normally take a few hours on horseback, took them an entire day on foot, practically limping. Only when the new moon quietly climbed into the night sky did they finally set foot on familiar land. Elder Shang cried, tears streaming down his aged face. He shouldn't have personally made this trade trip. If it weren't for seeking that bit of credit, why endure such hardship? Who knew the journey would be so perilous, nearly costing him his life? Fortunately, it was all over. They were home. Without stopping to rest, they traveled through the night by torchlight. Finally, a village stationed by the sea discovered them. Warmly welcomed into a villager's home, sipping a bowl of hot bamboo tube corn porridge, Elder Shang and his group finally felt alive again, returned to the human world. The shore across the sea, that place was terrifying. Turning the view back to Hanyang City, scattered snowflakes had begun to fall in the mountainous regions. The northern grazing teams and the construction army building the Fuma Pass had all returned. In Ruyang Commandery, smoke curled from the chimneys of newly built earthen houses, and the warm Kang, heated brick beds, burned day and night, bringing immense joy to the tribespeople who had newly joined the Han tribe. Although not as grand as the brick and tile houses of Hanyang City, the adobe houses paired with Kang were quite comfortable, warm in winter and cool in summer. Coupled with the large quantities of animal hides and fabrics you allocated from Hanyang City, it was enough to ensure everyone stayed warm through the winter. Simple smiles radiated from the faces of the new tribe members. This was definitely the warmest winter they had ever experienced. In Hanyang City, the fires of the metallurgy workshop blazed fiercely once again. With the significant population increase this year and the demands of external trade, iron pots, farm tools, and various implements were all in high demand. The iron rice bowls, the livelihoods of the entire tribe's tens of thousands, depended entirely on these two blast furnaces. In a nearby school building, you were contentedly flipping through a freshly printed copy of selected poems. The first batch of 3,000 books had all been printed and bound, with one copy given to each of the 300 students. The children were both surprised and delighted. After painstakingly carving characters with you for months, they finally saw the tangible result. Those little lead blocks could truly print books like magic. Looking down at the excitedly chattering students, you sighed silently in your heart. They would graduate in 2 months, and you didn't know how useful they would ultimately be. However, starting today, besides continuing to learn reading and writing, this new book, embodying your heart's blood, mainly the labor of plagiarism, was officially listed as required course material. Soon, the classroom echoed with the clear sounds of reading. Hoeing grain under the noon sun, sweat drips onto the soil below. Snow fell all day long, but it couldn't accumulate on the roofs of Hanyang City. The snowflakes melted quickly upon landing, warmed by the heat radiating from the indoor Kang, turning into water that trickled down the eaves and froze into crystal-clear icicles at the corners. It was during this early winter season that a major event for the Han tribe finally saw the light of day. After months of effort, the coin, wax molds you personally carved were finally completed. The Han tribe currency system you designed was similar to modern ones, divided into 3 tiers: yuan, jiao, and wen, equivalent to fen or cents, further subdivided into different denominations. There were 3 types of wen: 1 wen, 2 wen, and 5 wen. 3 types of jiao as well: 1 jiao, 2 jiao, and 5 jiao, and 1 extra for yuan: 1 yuan, 2 yuan, 5 yuan, and 10 yuan, from the smallest 1 wen to the largest 10 yuan. The system was entirely decimal. No profound mystical significance, purely for ease of calculation. After all, no matter how good you were at math, you couldn't handle primitive people struggling to count on their fingers. 7 denominations, each with a front and back design, meant you needed to carve 14 different steel dies. From designing the patterns and drawing sketches to painstakingly carving fine details with a small knife, you had toiled alone for months, nearly straining your eyes, but now it was finally accomplished. The 1 wen coin. The obverse featured a surrounding sheaf of rice and an auspicious cloud, symbolizing favorable weather and abundant harvests. The blank space indicated 1 wen and the formal Chinese numeral yi wen, 1 wen. The reverse bore the inscription, "Cast in the first year of the Tianqi era of the Great Han Empire, with your glorious image, wearing a flat-topped crown and ceremonial robes, in the center." Although you didn't possess such attire yet, didn't stop you from drawing it to satisfy the urge. As for the likeness of this portrait, about 70–80% similarity was good enough. Besides, you intentionally depicted yourself as more mature and imposing than your actual age. This was the imperial portrait printed on money. It had to have presence. History was full of examples. It was an unspoken rule. You understood. The 2 yuan coin. The obverse featured a farmer wearing a bamboo hat, bending over to plant rice seedlings, along with the denomination. The reverse followed a standard format, reign title, plus your portrait. The 5 yuan coin. The obverse pattern changed to a scene of a person plowing a field with an ox, with the denomination. The reverse, again, was the reign title plus your portrait. For the 3 jiao denominations, animal motifs were chosen. 1 jiao depicted a galloping steed, 2 jiao a nimble saiga antelope, and 5 jiao a giant eagle soaring with outstretched wings. The reverse remained the unchanging reign title plus your portrait. The 4 yuan denominations focused on light industry and grand narratives. 1 yuan obverse showed a woman weaving cloth. 2 yuan obverse depicted strong men forging iron. 5 yuan obverse featured a majestic 3-masted sailing ship, purely from imagination. 10 yuan obverse displayed a magnificent palace, also purely from imagination. The reverse, well, you guessed it, still the reign title and your increasingly imposing face. The 14 exquisite wax molds were finally ready. The next step was to mix fire-resistant kaolin clay with soil from ant nests, add water to make a slurry, and carefully encase the wax molds. Once the slurry dried completely, it would be heated to melt and pour out the wax inside, yielding the ceramic molds for casting the steel dies. To create qualified and durable steel dies, high-quality molten steel had to be cast directly. The steel produced previously by methods like fining or steel puddling wasn't hard enough. This time, you decided to try something more advanced, top-blown converter steelmaking. This technology wasn't impossibly difficult, but it wasn't simple either. For the Han tribe's current technological level, it was barely feasible, but dreaming of mass application or achieving modern steel quality was out of the question. The principle, roughly, was to pour molten iron into a large vat, crucible, then insert a pipe from the top and blow air forcefully into it. The oxygen in the air reacts with the carbon in the molten iron, producing carbon dioxide, which bubbles up, carrying away excess carbon and turning the molten iron into molten steel. Of course, you didn't have pure oxygen. Only air could be blown. The effect would certainly be less efficient, but something was better than nothing. The pipe used for top blowing was a steel tube hammered out with immense effort, connected to ceramic piping behind it, the joints sealed tightly with clay. It was connected to a large hand-cranked bellows requiring several people to operate frantically. This setup was incredibly cumbersome and impossible to move. The crucible containing the molten iron had to condescend to come to it. On this day, you personally oversaw the operation at the metallurgy workshop. First, the blast furnace produced iron. Then, the blazing molten iron was carefully drawn from the furnace bottom and poured into a crucible half a person's height. Next, several strong men used a specially made small cart to push the scorching molten iron, trembling, to the position beneath the top-blowing apparatus. The cart was then pushed onto a lifting platform and secured. Operating a lever, the platform was raised, allowing the nozzle of the steel pipe at the top to plunge deep into the bottom of the molten iron, ensuring full contact with the air. Everything was ready. At your command, the hand-cranked bellows at the other end of the pipeline began outputting furiously. A large volume of air was pumped into the crucible, immediately triggering violent chemical reactions upon contact with the superheated molten iron. The surface of the molten iron seemed to boil, churning with huge bubbles. Instead of cooling, The temperature rose, sending out waves of intense heat. This top-blowing process, although involving no additional fire, released enormous heat through the reaction itself, sufficient to keep the molten iron in a liquid state. The onlookers had long since retreated to a safe distance, craning their necks to watch. It was simply too hot near the converter, and the churning bubbles flung countless sparks in all directions. If you hadn't cleared the area beforehand, the entire workshop might have caught fire. The reaction continued for several minutes. Judging the timing was right, you immediately called a halt. Lowering the lifting platform, you moved closer to observe the color of the molten iron in the crucible. It looked very similar to the color of successfully fined steel from before. Success. This cauldron of boiling iron juice had now been gloriously transformed into molten steel. This large crucible of precious molten steel was prioritized for casting the molds for those 14 coin dies. The remainder wasn't wasted either. It was used to cast other parts needed for the coin production line. Components like 2 fine steel rollers for milling patterns onto the coin edges, fine steel rollers for the metal rolling mill used to press metal sheets thin, and the punches and base dies for striking the coin designs. After these critical pure steel parts were cast, they awaited a series of harsh treatments, cooling, reheating for tempering, and localized quenching of key areas, especially those 14 dies, which had to be hard, to increase hardness and durability. After quenching, the surface oxide layer was cleaned off using crudely prepared dilute hydrochloric acid, produced by reacting sulfuric acid and salt. This was followed by lengthy grinding and polishing processes, and finally, careful oiling for preservation. At long last, the Han tribe's first batch of coin dies, forged through immense hardship, was officially born. Although the production process was excruciatingly complex, this complexity itself was the strongest anti-counterfeiting guarantee. You had gone through so much trouble to create them, other tribes wanting to counterfeit them. Not a chance. Even people within your own tribe couldn't manage these techniques without your guidance. Therefore, you weren't worried about currency counterfeiting at all. With the steel dies and these core components ready, the next step was assembling the production assembly line. First step, metal rolling mill. Heat copper ingots, or, potentially in the future, silver ingots until softened, then feed them repeatedly into the rolling mill, like pressing noodles to flatten them into metal sheets of the required thickness. Second step, coin blank punching. Use a modified wind-powered automatic forging hammer, replacing the hammerhead, with a punch the size of a coin, and the anvil below with a steel die containing a hole. Place the rolled metal sheet on top, and with a loud clang, a pile of round coin blanks could be punched out. Third step, disc edge milling machine. Place the punched blanks into a foot-pedal-driven edge milling machine. Through the squeezing and friction of 2 high-speed rotating fine steel discs, the edges of the coin blanks were ground smooth, while simultaneously milling fine, textured anti-counterfeiting grooves onto the sides, making them feel slightly rough and adding a sense of quality. Fourth step, striking the design. The final step involved placing the edge-milled coin blanks onto a specially made coin press. This machine had the reverse coin die fixed below and the obverse die above, with guide rails ensuring precise alignment. Operating the machine delivered a sudden massive blow. With a resounding dwang, the exquisite designs and your glorious image were simultaneously imprinted onto both sides of the coin blank. A brand new coin, bearing your portrait and the hopes of the tribe, was thus born.